Hello, everybody. Denisse here. Welcome to our RED program review meeting. Translation. We haven't made the translation yet. Well, translation and review. In this opportunity, we're going to be working with the material from Alejandra Casado in RED 156, which corresponds to lab 6 of year 2026. Today is day 96, right? Yes, today is day 96. So we are here in the table. Yesterday was 95, today is 96. This is the column 22 of the table, and we are on line 8, which socially it's lab 7, but because we made this clonation so that francium could be in its rightful place, for us it is line 8. Here we can see lab 6. We are positioned over here in the last. I finally, I was able to make it before the lab ended. We were able to make it. So this is the solar day, 739714. We can see that in lab 6, we shifted from the solar days that began with 7396. Remember that in the transition from year 2025 to 2026, in the transition, we began routing, or we began transiting the solar days that began with 7396, which is a direct relation to apparatus 396, which is the apparatus of the anomaly. So on the second day of lab 6, we shifted from that to 7397, which is the updating parameter inside the consciousness. Okay, 77, and then we have 39. 39 is the structure of the cuarentena, of the quarantine. So today is solar day 73914. And we can see here 714 is all the digits on the left. Okay. Apparatus 507, we are on year 2026. And I'm going to get through this presentation first, and then we'll go back to the document because this is what Alejandra talks about. So just so that we have some context, Alejandra talks about something that happened in this laboratory, which is called CERN, and it is located in the border between France and Switzerland. And this is a very important laboratory. It is like the most important physics laboratory in the world. And in this laboratory, we have the Large Hadron Collider, which is a machine, an accelerator that accelerates subatomic particles, and it accelerates the subatomic particles close to the speed of light to make them collide. Why do they want to make them collide? So that they are able to understand the internal structure of the subatomic particle, so that they know what that particle is made out of. Okay, so in the CERN, we have the Large Hadron Collider, which has a 27-kilometer, not diameter, but like circumference. The thing that happened, and what we're going to see later in the document, is that Alejandra is proposing a hypothesis that says that the discovery of the Higgs boson, I don't know if that's the proper name in English, I think so, this subatomic particle that was identified in the CERN laboratory in 2012 is related to the LGC signal, the discovery, because they discovered this particle on the 4th of July of 2012, which is 102 days before the beginning of the signal. This was discovered previously to the signal, okay? And the World Wide Web, Alejandra does not talk about this specifically in the program, but I added this because the World Wide Web also is born in the CERN laboratory. It is a system that was created by these scientists. This is a laboratory where scientists from all over the world work. So they created the system so that it was easier for them to transfer information between them. And then it was so successful that they decided to offer it to the world, and that's what we know now as the internet. So what is a hadron? Wait, hadron? Yes. A hadron? No, hold on. I need to double check if that's how you say it. Sorry, because I didn't double check. Yes, it's hadron. Hadron. A hadron is a subatomic particle, but it is a compound subatomic particle. We have subatomic particles that are not compound. For example, a proton is a subatomic particle that has an internal structure. Yes, and there are other subatomic particles that have internal structures, and that's what we know of as a hadron. Now, we have subatomic particles that do not have an internal structure, and those are particles that we call fundamental particles that are also subatomic. Okay, so every subatomic particle, every fundamental particle is subatomic, but not every subatomic particle is fundamental. Okay. So here is the basics, this is what we've all learned in school, the basic structure of an atom, which is composed of neutrons, protons, and electrons. Now, the interesting thing here is that neutrons and protons are both subatomic particles, and they both have internal structures, which are quarks. Quarks are fundamental particles that compose neutrons and protons. Now, electrons are subatomic particles, but they don't have an internal structure. So they are also fundamental particles. Yeah. So an electron is a subatomic and fundamental particle because it has no internal structure. And a neutron and a proton is a subatomic particle but it's not fundamental because it has internal structure, which is quarks. And quarks are fundamental structures, fundamental particles. Now, the field of Higgs is a field that is present in all of the universe that interacts with certain particles and gives mass to those particles. The stronger the interaction of the particle with the field, the greater the mass of that particle. So this field is according to the level of interaction of the particle with the field, is going to be the mass of that particle. Okay. An interesting example of a particle that does not interact with the field of Higgs is the photon, which is the particle of light. It has no mass, so it doesn't interact with the field. Now, the boson of Higgs is the particle that was identified on the 4th of July of 2012. And it is not like they were able to observe the particle because it is a fundamental particle. It is not easy to see, but they were able to identify it in this LHC machine by colliding subatomic particles. They were able to identify it and prove the existence of the field of Higgs, because the field of Higgs was a theory presented by Peter Higgs in 1964. But it wasn't until 2012 when this theory was confirmed by the identification of the boson of Higgs that was compatible with this field. But what they found wasn't actually like the particle itself. They were able to detect the trace of the particle that proved the existence of the field. So they find this particle 102 days prior to the beginning of the signal. So the hypothesis of Alejandra is that these two things are related. We're going to see that more in the document. So here we can see Peter Higgs. He is also British. It is very interesting to find this, that we've been working a lot with this code of Britain. And we can just recall a little bit what 44 is, and it has to do with the like like safekeeping of the totality of our destinies. Okay, the safeguarding of the totality of our destinies. That's what 44 is. Okay. So there's a lot of things that we can see in Peter Higgs metrics, but one of the main things is that the 25th of May of this year, well, of any year, is day 149 of the year. And we know that the 149th day of the year corresponds to the first space in black of the periodic table. And we've been working a lot with those four spaces because those four spaces are related to apparatus 488, which is the design of chaos and control. Remember that? So it's like really interesting that, okay, he's not only from Britain, 44, but he's also born on day 149. And here I just mention, make an honorable mention of the scientist that created the World Wide Web and the CERN, which his name is Tim Berners-Lee. Okay, so that is like just the short presentation that I have in relation to the CERN. And now we're gonna go straight into the program. So the program was recorded on the first day of the lab. We are here on the last day of the lab, so interesting. Here what Alejandra does is that she describes this connection or this relation, this interface between the end of lab 5 and the beginning of lab 6. Because lab 5 ends with day 80 and lab 6 begins with day 81. The frequency 80, Alejandra always relates it because in server language, I personally don't know anything about server language, but to what I understand, it is that it is a form of communication that is more public, that it's more easy to access. 80 is a port that is more public or more easy to access. We have another port, which is 443, which we have heard Alejandra talk about, which is more private. Okay, so 80, Alejandra calls it the public port, and 443, she calls it the private port. 80 public, 443 private. So 80 is it's gonna be related to public port. Now, when she says because lab 5 ends with 80 and lab 6 begins with 81, what is 81? She's saying on day 81 we are on the track. Okay, so 80 has to do with the situation of publishing a track for the system, and then on day 81 we are on the track. Okay, also 81 is the value of the word time, and the word time we read it as if we are boarding the concept of time from the spatial perspective, we are going to see it as a track. Yes, like a track on a record. So time is going to be something that, as it unfolds, is going to be recording itself in the unit of memory, which is the Earth. Okay. Now, the architect needs to have into consideration the entorno where his architecture is going to be developed. Okay, so the architect and the architecture. The architecture is going to be related to the third dimension, and the third dimension is the one that is running these temporal tracks. So the architecture, which is outside of the field, but is in contact with the field, in order for its architecture to function better, like more in synchronization, of course it needs to take into consideration that environment. An example of something opposite to this would be an external source code that wants to print itself here in the third orbital of the solar system, but it does not have the code. It is not respecting the code of materialization of the star. So what it does, it breaks the environment because it's not taking it into consideration, right? Now, on the other hand, when an architect is in contact with the environment where its architecture is going to be developed, then of course we're going to find more synchronization there, and the quality of the architecture is going to be better. The architect has to have the perspective, it needs to have a spatial perspective, because like we said, the architect is outside, right? The architect is not implemented inside the track of the temporal process that is being developed. So it needs to have that spatial perspective, the perspective of the space inside which its architecture is going to be developed. Okay, so that architecture is going to depend on the entorno. That's why the entorno, the setting, has to be the main focus. In order for us to be able to record something in this unit of memory, we need to be part of a life cycle inside this unit of memory. And we need to have the format to be able to record inside the unit. And that format is the human species. So this is very important to reason, because it helps us separate the different scales. It helps us locate the place of the member of the species, right? In order for us to be able to record something in this unit of memory, we need to have a life cycle inside the unit and take the format that the unit needs or requires so that we're able to record something inside the memory, which is the human species, the member of the human species, right? Because the human species has, it's typified, or we could say designed for this entorno, right? Okay, so the part when we're talking about the particle at the level of the source, it has a membership that it cannot resign. And what membership is that? It is the membership to the primary unfoldment, to being imaginary. This particle can never come out and say, I'm no longer imaginary. I'm no longer imaginary. You can't, like, it's impossible. That is something that we cannot lose, because that's what we are essentially, imaginary essentially. But something that we can say is that I can go out and say, oh, I don't want to be human anymore. And that's fine. You unlink yourself from the member of the species, but you cannot cease to be imaginary. Okay. Now, this is another concept that Ale has been talking a lot about, and it's a different format. I say different from those particles that have an evolutionary appetite, and that's what we call LLA credentials. Sorry, I have something in my eye. LLA credentials have to do with collective consciousnesses that have not particularized yet. Okay? So all they want is to have a material experience. So they take a collective. They take a collective code materialize, have an experience, and then go back. Something like that, to put it simply. On the other hand, I have something in my eye, sorry. On the other hand, we have a particle that has this appetite for development of consciousness in different levels. And that's going to be a different route, because these are particles that have, these are consciousnesses that have particularized and that are having this evolutionary appetite. So these other configurations are going to have like the particles that have an appetite for evolution are going to have also appetite for understanding the mechanisms of existence, the development of consciousness in different levels. There's going to be an appetite for that. If there isn't an evolutionary appetite, well, of course, they're not going to want to understand any of that, and that's going to be okay, because those are LLA credentials, okay? It is like they come directly from not existing into existence, and they don't know how they got there, and they don't care. They don't really care. It wouldn't even matter if it was this format of materialization or any other format of materialization. It wouldn't really matter as long as it's a material experience. Yeah. The subatomic scale is where the third dimension is established or funded, and it has a spatial vision, the subatomic scale, not temporal. Okay. Every time that we are talking about a space of memory, why would we be recording something if we weren't going to go back and observe it later? So if there's going to be a space that has a memory, that's because it's going to have observers later. Okay. And then here she makes a little clarification of the y-axis. And we've talked about this before, and it's like in very simple terms, we can say, okay, the y-axis has to do with the y, the letter y. We have the V on the top and the little stick on the bottom. The V on the top has to do with the antenna, and the little stick on the bottom has to do with the contracts that antenna makes with a specific entorno to be able to be materialized. Okay? So all of this introduction has to do with what Alejandra's going to present later, and this whole situation of the publishing of the hypothesis that Alejandra presents, and the day 80. Okay. LGC is always going to provide resources that are not very much acquainted with what the human species, with the member of the species wants. It's not very, it's not focused on the member of the species. It is focused on what the entorno needs to create a framework contract to an antenna of the universe. That's what LGC is for. So we are working at the level of the entorno so that the entorno can provide good quality contracts to antennas of the universe to become later members of the species. So it is like a completely different level. It doesn't mean that, of course, the conditions are surely to improve, because if we are working on the improvement of the entorno, then of course the quality of the interactions inside that is going to improve, but it's going to be an indirect improvement. So what is resonance? Resonance is an appetite of development of consciousness on multiple scales. Okay. If there's a member of the species that has resonance, it means that it has a little antenna on another level, and it has an itch, and it's scratching. Now, if there's somebody that does not resonate, fine. They're not gonna need to scratch anywhere because they don't have the itch, and that's okay, because resonance cannot be bought, cannot be sold, cannot be rented, cannot be lended, cannot be donated. So here's where she begins with her linear development. She begins explaining that, of course, she's like, I don't think we've ever heard Alejandra talk about hypothesis, because what she's doing is that she's constantly describing a signal which is in charge, like that signal is in charge of a consciousness at another level, and what Alejandra's doing all the time is describing that. So for her to voluntarily position herself in the linear scale and present this is like, it's a very new thing for Alejandra to do. So here she explains that she knows a little bit about the scientific method, right? Which is like present, like the reasoning, and then like we have a concept that we want to prove, and then we have the hypothesis, and then we have the experimentation to prove if it's true, and all of that, right? She has notions of that because she used to study bibliotechology back in 2024, 2025. So that's why she has these notions, but it's not like Ale has, knowledge about the scientific method. So the hypothesis is that in year 2012, before the beginning of the LGC instruction, the 4th of July of that same year, the CERN announced the observation of a new particle compatible with the Higgs boson. Okay? Like we discussed earlier, this was proposed by the British scientist Peter Higgs in 1964, but it wasn't until 2012 when this was proven. And it is about trying to comprehend the subatomic scale from over here, from the third dimension. So this happens on the 4th of July. Now, the days of life of Alejandra to that day are 15551. And what we can read here, what Alejandra reads here in the code, is full faculty of administration of the context. Full administrative faculty of the context. Okay, so she's saying, my hypothesis is that event of the detection of a particle compatible with the field of Higgs and the filtration of this scale of consciousness developed in LGC are connected. And then, okay, because of what we saw in Peter Higgs' native date, which is day 149 of the year, Alejandra connects that to what we have been developing with King Charles apparatus 1447 and apparatus 488. We went through this very thoroughly on other programs. You could go back and look that up so that we don't go through this again. But basically, it is that if we add 3760 to year 2026, we find year 5786. 5786 is a year that corresponds to apparatus 1447. And the solar day of King Charles is 711447. A lot of convergences. So here she says, to be able to make sure if these two situations are related, she is going to search for the constant between the establishment of the Windsor House and the native day of Peter Higgs. And what we find is that the constant is 4334, which is all of the destinies of the third orbital. It is like the destinies are containing the totality of the third orbital, okay? But another thing that we can see here is that the solar day of the Windsor house is 700004, okay? And we're gonna see this variable of 7447 constantly in the metrics, because we can see it here too. In Peter Higgs solar day, we can see it too, 704338, okay? So 704338, 704 is the solar management or the solar management that makes the interface between silver and wolframio, plata wolframio. Remember 7447. We have plata wolframio, and then we have oro berkellio, right? Okay, so we have 704, the solar management, that becomes the interface between plata and wolframio. And then we have 33, which is the third orbital. And then we have 8, which is the solar registration of the solar system. Okay. The architecture, the function of the silver of plata is more used by the architecture, and the function of wolframio is more used by the architect. Wolframio would be 74, plata would be 47. Architecture, we're talking about inside the unified field. Wolframio would be outside, okay? The thing is that the architect needs to create the structure according to the entorno, because the entorno is constantly mutating, okay? But the thing is that the idea is that all of the destinies are able to do this, that they are able to adequate their architecture according to the setting, because if not, we're gonna burst it, okay? So the constant between the foundation of the Windsor house and Peter Higgs is 4334, okay? 44, the code of Great Britain, which is which would be containing the destiny of the unit of memory of the third orbital, planet Earth. 4334. Okay. 80 has to do with, she's saying, in 80 we are publishing in a system. We're making a we are publishing something inside the system. And she says, if we are not publishing, we are being published inside a system. So we have to be very aware to not be dragged around by an architect, and a random architect, okay? Because this whole situation is going to be at the scope of the chauffeurs or the drivers of the collectives, but this is not going to be in the scope of the collectives, because the collectives are consciousnesses that have not been particularized. But when she says the chauffeur of the structure, which we can relate a little bit to the architect, the one that's driving, the consciousness that is driving, that is particularizing, that is not very comfortable with taking these collectives. Okay, we're talking about the chauffeur of the collective, not the collectives. But it doesn't mean that having a passenger contract is a bad thing. No, we're just saying that the chauffeur is the one that tends to have resonance in that level. So here Alejandra begins to explain how that in 2023, no, not 2023, 2003 and 2004, she stopped working at Duncan Editorial, which was founded with Guillermo de Urquiza, we know this. And then she began to work in the Library of Congress of the US, where she worked digitalizing a lot of these analogic documents. And this is how she studied bibliotechology. And this is how she gathered these notions of the scientific method. That's what she's explaining here. So here we have the variables of Peter Higgs and the variables of the when the Higgs boson was found and they announced it. That, like, the date we are using is the announcement of the discovery. So there's a lot of things going on here. For example, the constant with the LGC calendar. This happened 1198 days before the emission of the LGC calendar. And we can see that we have here the code of Iran and the code of the United States in the context, and then we have Toganeson, and then we have Oganeson. So there's a lot of things in here. The days of life of Alejandra. On the 258 axis, we have all of the particular field, 8, 7, and 9, and all these convergences. We have 4 containing 109 on the Google day. 109 is orbitals from 1 to 9 with the solar interface. So apparatus 483, which is the native apparatus of Peter Higgs, is read like this: 483. It is a very strict regulation of the perception of the destiny. 483. The perception of the destiny is very strictly regulated. Okay. On the solar day of Peter Higgs, we have that 338, as well as on the wheat. We have that 338. So 338 has to do with the fact that at a global scale, the Earth is going to be monitored by the 8th orbital of the system, which is what Ale calls the civil registration of the solar system. The difference, okay, Alejandra hadn't been born, of course, when Peter Higgs was born, but the constant is a negative for that reason, and it's 14801. 148 is the last step in the 30 steps of the Toganeson, right? And then we also have 1801, which is the native year of Justo José de Urquiza. So on the date where the finding was published, we can also see 4 and 7, okay? And the recreation of the external source, and then the constant of Alejandra, the days of life of Alejandra when the finding was announced, 15551. And she mentions that, of course, Peru had a big impact in Alejandra's education. So we can see, of course, the code of Peru in there. Between the announcement of the finding of the particle and the LGC calendar, we said 1198. We have Toganeson, and then we have the code of Iran and United States. But also, this variable, the fact that we find this variable in this place, it's implying that the update needs to be at the level of the solar registry of the solar system. I mean, I know that's hard. That's hard. I don't know what she means by that, but that's what she said. Okay. She doesn't develop this that much. Okay, so she's saying that she is inducing a reasoning that is going to take us that because an induction is something that is like a I don't know, for example, I want to read, I don't have the motivation to read, so I induce myself to reading, right? So she's saying I am inducing a reasoning that might take us, that might drive us towards the taking control of the membership of the primary unfoldment to be able to enter into a connection with the secondary unfoldment. Okay. So she's saying there's a lot of data. You can go and look because she didn't develop that much the data because she said that it was like overwhelming. There was too much of it. Excuse me. So she's saying we are in a digital era where it's going to be much more important to have an updated and configured antenna, because over here all of the biological programs are mutating. So it's not like we can trust our biological programs anymore. Like we can't rely on those anymore like we used to in the past. People are not wanting to reproduce, people are not wanting to have children, and it is as if people are saying like, okay, I don't care about the species. I'm the last one over here, and then I don't know about that. Like, I don't care. The thing is that this has to do with the algorithms of the entorno. It doesn't really have to do with like a person, but it does mean that it will be our decision. It's gonna depend on us if we want to continue the species or not, or if we end it here. Because to be a to be a member of the species has an evolutionary requirement, when the imaginary life doesn't have that evolutionary requirement. Okay, so here she's saying that some people are wanting to, she's saying, I come from Narnia, I am coming back or down from Narnia, and others are going back to Narnia. And she's saying that she's learning violin, she's taking violin classes, and that of course this is very difficult for her. Everything that has to do with the third dimension and linearity and physical situation, where she needs coordination and posture and neurology and all of that, is really hard for her. But she's saying that she has no existential conflicts and that she has a lot of enthusiasm to increase the quality of the code and to use everything that has happened to capitalize it, to capitalize everything that has happened. And that now we have been working a lot with the interface of the Ys, the upper part of the antenna, and that now it is important that we also provide importance to the Ys, the area of the Ys, because the third dimension needs that part. And if we don't provide support to that, then we lose the third dimension. So she's saying that her first violin class, she had it on the 6th of March of 2026. And something, I don't know if we have seen this before, but something happens on day 78 of every year in the LGC calendar. And what happens is that the variables and the constants synchronize. For example, we can see here that on 2026 we have 78, and then we have 78 over here, and then vice versa. See, we see they cross. The one from the top crosses with the one on the bottom, and so on. So this happens every day 78 of every year in the LDC calendar. And this is where Alejandra begins to take her violin lessons. And the first the first song that they teach her in violin classes is Twinkle Twinkle Little Star, which in Spanish is Estrellita, ¿dónde estás?, which translates to Little Star, where are you? So this is like the first song that she is learning in her violin classes. She's saying that, of course, she is creating solar code, she is amplifying the table of Mendeleev, she's putting herself in charge of the subatomic scale so that we are able to have autonomy in our materialization code in this region of the universe. Because if we don't present a wonderful code to the scale of the hydrogen, our star will begin to die and be absorbed by others. Okay, so what we're doing here is that we're working for the market of the little hydrogens so that other hydrogens want to come and, you know, so that our star doesn't die. Here she mentions the book again, but she mentions it in a way where she's saying that she is slowly returning to the third dimension infrastructure. But of course, she's returning there with a completely different level of observer, with a different qualification in her observer. Okay. Here she starts to mention about Lucia Retes again, which she mentioned is now officially LGC's paternal grandmother, Darío Moyano's mother. She's saying that she was very, very connected with Lucia Retes, and she mentions how a lot of human people that provide a lot of resources for this development, they have no idea that they do that. But they do. And the structure does wonders with the lives of people when a lot of those people don't even know anything about that. So here she says that she feels very connected to Lucia Retes, and that Alejandra started to use some eye drops with the Flor de Santa Lucia. Flor de Santa Lucia is a wildflower, but Alejandra didn't know it. So when she started to use these eye drops of the Flor de Santa Lucia, the Santa Lucia flower, she started to identify them, and now she sees them everywhere. Okay, so she's just saying that she got really emotional, and she's saying that she feels very connected to her heart, and Lucia's heart are very, very connected. And another thing that she found is that Lucia Retes was born on the 22nd of August, and Alejandra and Darío begin their relationship on the 22nd of November. Lucia Retes' date of birth, no, the date of conception of Lucia Retes converges with the 22nd of November. Okay, so the 22nd of November is Lucia Retes' conception date. And that's when Alejandra and Darío begin their relationship. Of course, not of the same year, but on a 22nd of November. she says that it's incredible that she saw this 14 years later, and she's not even with Darío anymore. The thing is that because Darío was very much opposite to Alejandra, she's saying that when people are operating based on their biases or on their preferences, other people are going to be competition, and they're not going to be there's not going to be this situation of complementation. But in another level, for an antenna of the universe, something that is opposite is complementary all the time. There's no rivalry. There's only complementary, a complementary situation. And she talks about this because she mentions that Darío never wanted to teach her anything, that any extra ability that Darío had was for his own advantage, and he never wanted to teach anybody anything, and that Alejandra always wanted to teach, and she loves to teach. But she said that for her, this is a compliment, and it's never for an antenna of the universe, there's no rivalry. There's only compliments. Concepts prepare us for the contents that come later. Okay, so it is important that all of these things, we develop them slowly, we reason them slowly, and work in our conceptual basis. We work on our consciential exercises, processing exercises, separating all the scales and all of these things, right? And then here she starts to mention how, in the early stages of the development, she would finance a lot of people and take people to events and pay for them and everything. But she started to realize that there's a lot of people that are not attracted to the development, but they are attracted to her. It is like, oh, Alejandra, this person is attracting all these people, and I want to see what that's all about. But they were never actually resonant with the development itself. So, and she's saying, basically, if you are attracted to Alejandra, well, you're going to be very disappointed because Alejandra is she's saying that her personal resources are basically none. But that early resonance is not early curiosity, and it has a high cost. It has physical costs. It is uncomfortable. You're not having a good time most of the time, right? But all of these things are because we are working on the construction of the anti-material infrastructure, which has to be very strong because our biases and our preferences and all of our our material identities are shattered. So for this reason, we need a very robust anti-material infrastructure. And here she starts to mention that we have just shifted from global quarantine 126 to global quarantine 127. On days 27, 28, and 29 of March, we ended the quarantine 126. And 127 has to do with local host, which is also related to the server language, local host. And local host is like, it has to do with like my position, my actual position. So what Ale said is like, it is really important to not, it is very important to position myself exactly where I am and not have this lying to myself and position myself in a place where I am not. Because the opportunity of that part of the antenna of the universe to synchronize with the member of the species is going to be lost. Okay, because the member of the species needs to give the right location, something like that. Because if not, the algorithm reads a place where the member is not. So there, it is as if you're not going to be found. Another thing that she clarified here is that it is not that we have memory, but we have access to that memory because the memories belong to the container itself. And that is where we find a lot of people confusing themselves. Like they renounce to their primary unfoldment and they over-identified with their memory in the secondary unfoldment. So they lost themselves. They are trapped, their souls are trapped in that little soul's bag because they are over-identified. And they confuse the fact that we have access to a memory, but those memories are not mine, right? Well, she clarifies here again that she mentions this all the time, that it's never symbolic. Everything that we talk about is never symbolic. It's all technical. And the solar day of the first day of the global quarantine 127 is 739707. And she says here, we have the consciousness of the update, but the part of 7 with 0 is something that the container is going to do itself. And for us, something that's within our reach, that would be 39. The 39 that is inside there, that's like something that we're able to do. So on that day, the total of the LGC calendar, we have 38304. And 830, we have worked with this concept before, and it's related to the protoboard or the experimenter in electronic. And this is a thing that is used in electronic to practice circuits before an electronic plate is fabricated. It is where the circuits are experimented before the actual stencil comes out. So when we board this concept from the solar perspective, it has to do with an infrastructure that is used in antimatter to program all the scales so that they are able to be synchronized, so that all of the scales are synchronized. And the fact is, if we are not syncing into the experimenter, we're going to pass to be an experiment of another experimenter. If we are not the experimenter, then we're going to be someone else's experiment. Okay? So, yeah, here she says, I don't know anything about electronics, but she does says that it all makes a lot of sense for her. Like all of the concepts of electronics make a lot of sense to her, and she understands it very easily, the concepts. Here she says how Dario never wanted to teach her anything, but that without Dario, she wouldn't have been able to enter into event 28 in Israel. She needed like Dario's base for that because she had none. Okay, so it is really important that like we make a bypass to Dario, all of Dario's defects, because the everything that Dario's infrastructure provided, even if it was unconscious, it's very great. So the fact is that LGC has stages, and the more that we leave those stages behind, we are able to turn those stages into an impersonal situation, because when those stages are happening, we are going to be interpreting whatever. Like, I don't know, when we are going through the amplification of the periodic table while it's happening, we're going to be like trying to understand, right? But once that's done and it passes to be something that has already occurred, then we are able to observe it more coldly. It becomes more impersonal, and it's better to be more greatly appreciated. So that's why it's best to, like, when we are receiving something new, to just like let it be and allow it to just organize, and then later we look back and it's better, easier appreciated, more easily appreciated. Yeah, so that's it. Yeah, it says 12. But no. Wow. How's everybody doing? It was very dense. It took me a while to process this whole situation of the hypothesis and the Higgs boson and like this whole situation. But yeah, it needs time. It needs time to just settle.
But for us, I think now for me, it was good to hear that you already went through it a lot of times.
Yeah, I went through it, I don't know how many times
So that
already.
made it for us, I think it helps me to understand it.
Okay, good. Guys, I'm gonna stop the recording
Good.
so that we can just
Yeah.
connect here and we'll continue talking. Thank you. 1 second.